where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay? It's like incredible.
Trump is a former reality star, a businessman who bankrupted casinos, and is someone who has accumulated more lawsuits than all of the episodes of Law and Order combined. Yes, it's true. But in 2016, he shocked the world by getting elected the President of the United States. In 2020, he shocked us again by refusing to accept the defeat to Joe Biden and inciting an insurrection. In 2024, he became president for a second time, even though he spent the entire campaign with one foot in jail. So here we'll try to understand, how the fuck does this guy become a president twice? And how is it that no matter what he does, people still support him? The boiling point. For decades, the gap between the wealthy and the middle class had been widening. But things went to hell after the 2008 crisis. Millions of Americans lost their homes, their savings, and their jobs. The crisis started under Bush, and the Obama administration stepped in to stop the bleeding. But the problem with Obama was that he kept the same system alive. He did nothing to confront them. How many of those banks, how many of those bankers were punished severely for causing a global crisis? None. In fact, they got even more powerful. You know, this reminds me of an expression of Adam Smith. Mercy for the guilty is a spit in the face of the victims. And the victims in this case were tens of millions of people who had their lives turned upside down. Meanwhile, they watched the wealthy laughing their way to the bank. Then came the spread of woke ideology. It all started with a simple idea: treat people fairly and don't be a jerk. But over time, this mutated into a cultural morality police. If you say the wrong thing, you'll lose your job, you'll lose your business, you'll be ostracized by society. Now you might say, should we also allow the bigots to share their opinions? Yes, I believe we should. I don't know about you, but if someone hates me for whatever moronic reason because I'm awesome, I would like to know about it. That way I can protect myself by staying away from these people, or now that I have a general idea on why they hate me, I can have a conversation with them and who knows, I might change their mind. Look, if you strive to create a pure environment where everyone is careful about what they say, you will be surrounded by fake people. You don't know who to trust, who's your friend and who's your foe. You have a society full of people who are paranoid of each other. Now keep in mind that I live in Albania, which is a country with a long history of communism. So I understand really well the consequences of not trusting each other. It's one of the main factors in electing and keeping authoritarian leaders. So when you force people to be nice and hide their feelings, they never reflect on their behavior or change. They secretly feed on that resentment, and then they will put all of their effort into a charismatic demagogue who will speak for them. Which brings us to Donald fucking Trump. Imagine it's 2015 and you're a Republican voter who doesn't like Trump. But there's a rally in your town and out of curiosity, you decided to go. You're surrounded by people who are very enthusiastic, there is anticipation, and you feel conflicted. Trump starts by saying that you are special, that you are all true American patriots, and without wasting any time, he paints a picture of a nation under siege by immigrants and global elites. The more he talks, the more you agree with him, and at some point, you really start to feel it. That's how it is. Someone is finally seeing it. Now, after a couple of days, you happen to watch the same speech on YouTube, and you have this funny feeling. You notice that he contradicts himself a lot, and sometimes there's pure nonsense. But those things didn't really register when you were in the crowd. Nevertheless, you don't put much thought into it and move on with your day. But why does this happen? Why do you ignore the ramblings, the nonsense, the lawsuits, or even the opinion of actual psychiatrists, one of them including his own niece? Because at that moment you're not analyzing a politician, you're looking for meaning and order, and most importantly, you're looking for revenge. Revenge on those smug wealthy people, revenge on the morality police who spent years telling you what you're allowed to say, and on everyone who made you feel disposable. This reminds me of an African proverb. The child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. So when you see this guy who openly mocks the sacred cows of the establishment and goes out unscathed, you cannot help but support him. Most importantly, you are now part of a large movement that not only will destroy those spiteful groups, but will also bring the country back on track. In other words, you're not just some frustrated outsider. You're a key soldier in a righteous crusade to make the country great again. And this leads us to the shadow president. In 2015, Fox News hosted the Republican primary debate. Behind the scenes, Fox wanted to weaken Trump and clear the path for more traditional candidates. So during the debate, Megyn Kelly confronted Trump with his past comments about women, but the attack didn't really hurt him, and it was clear that Trump dominated the night. Then he did something unthinkable. He accused Fox News of being biased, and then he boycotted the channel. This was insane. No Republican would ever dare to criticize Fox because it would destroy their career. Yet the conservative base sided with Trump. That's when Steve Bannon steps in. He's the head of Breitbart, one of the biggest conservative websites. Now, up until that point, Bannon thought that he had no chance of winning. But when he saw how conservatives sided with Trump over Fox, which was something sacrilegious, he recognized something bigger. Trump had the charisma and power to break the old Republican Party and replace it with a populist nationalist movement. So Breitbart launched wave after wave of articles attacking Megyn Kelly and Fox for what they saw as a coordinated hit job. The backlash was so intense that Kelly began receiving death threats. Roger Ailes personally called Bannon and asked him to stop the attacks, but Bannon told him that Breitbart was independent and, in his words, the fight was on. Now let's go deeper into understanding Steve Bannon because people like him are very dangerous. You know, they are possessed by an ideology. In this case, Bannon is a right-wing populist nationalist. For years, he looked for someone strong enough to push the movement into the mainstream, but he failed until he found Trump. Now, both Trump and Bannon have similar views, but as you have noticed, Trump is not coherent, he's not clear, so Bannon provided a structured ideology. Some of the core beliefs are: the elites cannot be trusted, the system is rigged, the America should always come first, and that the country is under constant threat. Now this movement has different groups of people, but if you speak with them, they will give you variations of the same worldview, right? In addition, Bannon perfected the strategy of using chaos to overwhelm their opponents. You know, I used to watch all of these shows by John Oliver, Jon Stewart, Seth Meyers, and sometimes Stephen Colbert. I was also active on Reddit and paid attention to Reddit Popular. During the election year, all of those shows and posts were about mocking everything that Trump said or did. Consequently, there was very little space for his opponents. I mean, we understand that Trump sucks, but what is the alternative? If you tell people that they have to pick the lesser of two evils, they will likely stay home. So chaos is not a bug, it's a feature. When you overwhelm the media, you mobilize your supporters while discouraging some of theirs. And what happened in 2024? He preserved his votes while millions of Democrats didn't vote at all. I'm not saying that the chaos was the only reason, but it definitely helped him. And the beauty is that it's still helping him. Have you noticed that ever since he won, the overall narrative has been that he's a fascist who must be stopped? But here's the thing. If you're calling someone a fascist, then there's not much to debate. You're essentially telling people to take to the streets and save the country. So if you keep pumping that level of outrage without giving people any real way to act on it, then they will burn out. They will fall into a state of disillusionment and apathy, which are the perfect conditions to keep the things the way they are, the way they have always been. Alright, so far we have talked about resentment, division, institutional distrust, media chaos, and the growing belief that America is under siege. But all of that is just the environment. It creates the conditions. But a movement doesn't arise from conditions alone. It needs a figure who pulls everything together. It needs a hero. History has shown that when society is in a crisis, it looks for a hero. Not a politician, not a manager, a hero. Someone who dares to identify what is going wrong and has the strength to oppose the establishment. Now, Trump is not your typical hero, nor your typical politician for that matter, but he gives you permission to say the forbidden things, to stop pretending, to fight instead of explaining yourself. He also gives you an important role. When you're hearing him speak, he alternates between presenting himself as a hero and implying that you are. His identity merges with yours, and of course, you're both playing the role of the savior of America. As a result, the vulgarity becomes proof of honesty, the constant attacks become proof that he's being persecuted. You know, the cherry on top of the 2024 election was when the prosecutors raised dozens of charges and failed to put him in jail. And the media was always like, this time they got him. Nope, false alarm. 1 week later they're like, this time he's really screwed. Nope, false alarm again. Every indictment, every dramatic headline saying they almost got him became a ritual reenactment of his crucifixion and resurrection. Because look, every prophetic figure is attacked by the establishment. That's expected. It legitimizes his authority. It proves that he's dangerous to the people in power. And since his identity has merged with yours, those persecutors and the media figures are also attacking you. So the more he's targeted, the stronger his narrative becomes. You know, he became the man who would drain the swamp, even though he lived in it, expanded it, and benefited by it. Now the question naturally arises. If the more you attack him, the more powerful he becomes, how do you actually destroy him? Well, I'm no political expert, but maybe don't vilify him unless you're willing to head to the streets. Let me give you an example of how this works. In the Republic of Kosovo, there was a small political party called Self-Determination. Throughout the years, they accused the people in power of corruption and of quietly cooperating with Serbia, which, in case you don't know, is an enemy country since they came to the Balkans in the 7th century. But here's the key element. They didn't make those harsh accusations on TV debates or in parliament and then go home and watch Netflix. They organized massive protests, they threw tear gas in the parliament, and some protesters threw Molotov cocktails in government buildings and even at the Prime Minister's residence. On the outside, these people look like radicals, but if you consider the decisions that the government took, and the consequences still being felt to this day, then it makes sense. Eventually, this small party gained 51% of the votes, and it was, the first time in 30 years that a party had that much support. So it's paramount to align what you say and what you do. In an environment full of distrust, to the point of paranoia, that's how you gain people's support. And that's how you create a better competing, more compelling narrative. Now, how does that look from the perspective of a politician? First, you don't fuck around. If you claim to be against corruption, you don't shake hands with corrupt people. And if that means calling out members of your own party, you do it. And of course, if you say your opponents are traitors, you mobilize people against them. Second, you take risks. Anyone can point out the problem and complain, but very few will actually put themselves on the line. Very few will risk their career or even their lives over it. Third, you talk like a real person. You don't use that bureaucratic BS. Fourth, you explain in a simple way what the problem is, who's responsible, and what you're going to do about it. And finally, and most importantly, action, action, action. Now I want to make a future projection. What happens if the Democrats cannot destroy his myth and he's out of the game because he retires or passes away? The conservative media will keep the myth alive because it's incredibly profitable. You know, think about what happened to Charlie Kirk and multiply it by 10. You know, they will publish endless content polishing his image, and they would essentially have a clean brand. And since economic inequality, distrust of institutions, and the distrust of others are high, you have the perfect conditions for the populist nationalist movement to become stronger. It will take a while, but eventually they will find a charismatic leader with less baggage. If you think Trump is ruthless, wait until you see his successors. And no, it's not Vance. He has the charisma of a snail. In conclusion, the real problem is no longer Trump as an individual. That phase is over. The real problem is the ideology that elevated him and will outlive him. And the danger is self-reinforcing. The worse things get, the stronger the movement becomes. If the opposition doesn't confront the ideology itself, the US will likely follow the same pattern seen in former communist countries, where the only real change is the recycling of authoritarian leaders. Now, I would highly recommend that you watch the PBS documentary series Money, Power, and Wall Street. It reveals the chain of decisions that triggered the 2008 collapse and its impact. And as I explained earlier, the central figure behind Trump's first victory was Steve Bannon. In these 2 interviews by PBS, he lays out his strategies and ideology. You know, it seems like Trump is improvising, but in my view, he's following the Bannon's playbook. So learn about him because, as Sun Tzu would say, know your enemy. And if you want to know yourself on a deep level, check out my advanced course, The Social OS.